Hi everyone, my name is Kartik and my channel is about mental models. In my 19th Cognitive Bias mini-series video, I will be talking about selection bias. Selection bias is where a biased set of inputs which are not representative of the wider population subsequently lead to a skewed outcome. This can be both intentional, where a person wishes to deliberately skew the outcome one way or another and makes the selection themselves, or even unintentional, where the person doesn't realize that an outcome may be skewed based on a selection. There are two important forms of selection bias. One is volunteer bias and the other is non-response bias. For volunteer bias, the bias exists as the outcome is skewed as it is based on only those who are willing to volunteer. So the outcome is based on only those willing to volunteer, and therefore it ignores the population that did not volunteer. In the case of non-response bias, you would send out a survey to be completed, but the outcome again would only be based on those who respond, and it would ignore, again, non-responses. And so that would mean it would not appropriately represent the population, and the outcome would provide a skewed view of the wider demographic. Let's look at an example. If we were assessing patient satisfaction in a hospital, and this is what the population of patients looks like. Here's one I made earlier in the words of Valerie Singleton. So this is what the population of patients looks like in the hospital where we're assessing patient satisfaction. And if we select the following patients for the assessment, if we select this is our selection. So if we select those patients, those 9 patients for the assessment, then the outcome is of course not representative of the full population. You can see that we are disproportionately selecting the patients represented by the green circles, and there are not enough blues, there are no reds, and so it's not representative of the population. Now, other examples would follow essentially the same premise, in that a biased selection, biased inputs, would determine a skewed outcome, and that's the pattern. So why does this bias happen? Number 1, errors in procedure. There could be an error in the selection process for choosing the inputs, which could then, as a result, lead to a biased selection and a skewed outcome. Number 2, flawed design. Similar to the above, but a little bit different. Rather than incorrectly selecting one input over another, if the process of selection is flawed from the outset, such as we are basing our outcome on a volunteering process, then the selection process by design is flawed, in that it will be based on the willing volunteers and therefore will skew the outcome. And so if we have a flawed design, then we can give rise to selection bias. Number 3, and I'm going to call this deliberate. So seeking a deliberate outcome is what I'm trying to say. The people making the selection may want to show a specific outcome and therefore may select inputs that work in their favour to get the intended outcome. And there are a whole host of feelings attached to why someone may want to do this, such as the desire to feel good about ourselves in proving something right, and also trying to avoid feelings of being wrong, so avoiding the opposite. And so these are the key whys of why this bias happens. So how do we overcome this bias? Number 1, very similar to previous ones, surprise, surprise, awareness. People can overlook this bias in unintended situations, or where they are not intending to skew the outcome or select bias input. So where it's unintentional, they may overlook this bias in those scenarios. Therefore, understanding what this bias is, why it happens, and where it can manifest itself, and when the outcomes can be skewed, is of course very important in trying to overcome this. Number 2, remember. So by that I mean remember past scenarios where you have selected inputs to get a specific outcome, so that you can identify those situations in the future. So if you sort of had a biased selection in the past in a given scenario, and that same scenario or a very similar one presents itself again, then you can realize that, oh, actually the last time I did this I ended up with a skewed outcome because I biased my selection, therefore I should be conscious of not doing it this time. So remembering past scenarios can help us reduce or overcome this bias in future scenarios. Number 3, independent selection. when confronted with those scenarios where you remember something from the past, when confronted with those scenarios, allow someone independent to select the inputs who is unconnected with the process. This will minimize the risk of you making a biased selection again, and therefore mitigating the risk of falling into selection bias. Number 4, I'm going to call this bigger sample. Consider a bigger sample. Where possible, increase the number of inputs so that your outcome is less dependent on fewer inputs. This may not always be possible, but where it is, if you can select a bigger sample, then the outcome may be more representative. So going back to my example of the patient satisfaction, I'm just selecting 9 out of the population. If I were to select another 9, then I would be definitely getting a few more reds, a few more blues, a few more oranges. And so that bigger selection would be more representative of the population than the selection I have made at present, which is of those 9 patients. Number 5. Randomization. I'm going to call this randomization. So use randomization. Again, where it is possible, it might not be possible in all scenarios, but where possible, don't make haphazard selections. Randomize the data or information before making a selection. If that's not possible, if you know all the data and you can't randomize it, then give each sample number, give each item in the population a sample number, and use a random seed generator, again where possible, use a random seed generator to select the numbers. So in this case, I've got a number of patients in this example. I could give each patient a number and then use a random seed generator to select 9, 10, 15, 18, whatever it is, number of patients. And then again, that's a random sample and I've not been biased in selecting it, or I've not made a biased selection. It's a random selection. It's more random than if I had chosen something. So use randomization where possible. All of these techniques will help to overcome and reduce selection bias, which will help to bring about a more accurate conclusion and outcome. Although the intended outcome may not be what you intend, so when you get to something, it might be different to what you wished it to be, it will be more representative of the thing you are seeking to measure. So in this case, patient satisfaction. If we pick a better sample, then we will get a better outcome. And based on that, we can make a more accurate decision, which can lead to better outcomes. And that's selection bias in a nutshell. And that's all for this video. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel. And whilst you're here, why not watch this video from earlier in my cognitive bias mini-series. And I will see you again in the next one with another video. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.